Hi, welcome to Bakes and Blenders. I'm Colleen. Today I'm going to show you how to make this fantastic mini version of an opera cake. We've got layers of joconde sponge soaked with a coffee syrup, layered with coffee buttercream, chocolate ganache, and topped with a delicious chocolate glaze. If that sounds fantastic to you, let's get started.
This opera cake recipe has a lot going on, so I like to break it up over 3 days. On day 1, we are going to make the coffee syrup and the coffee buttercream. Once your coffee syrup is room temperature, or at least close to it, can be a little bit warm, put it in a container like a mason jar, seal it up, and you can keep it in your fridge until you're ready. This coffee buttercream is kind of like a hack for Swiss meringue buttercream, so much easier too. It's originally from Sugar Geek Show, but this time we are making a coffee variety. You can add as much or as little rehydrated espresso powder as you'd like. Just add a little bit at a time until you have the flavor that you want. It is day 2 and we are making the chocolate ganache and the joconde sponge. For the chocolate ganache, I like to heat the cream and the butter in a saucepan until it's hot but not bubbling. Then pour it over the finely chopped chocolate, let it sit for a minute or two, and stir until it's smooth. Then just set it aside, let it cool down to room temperature. It should be about a peanut butter consistency. And then you can cover it up and put it in the fridge. Now, I do suggest taking it out the night before you're going to use it so that it has time to soften up. Time to make that joconde. Add half of your eggs and you're going to mix it for about a minute or two. Now, here's a pro tip. You're going to have those extra egg yolks from those egg whites we're going to use later. I just added enough egg whites from my carton that I used to make the buttercream. That way I didn't have to waste any more eggs. Now you can add the other half of your eggs, mix for about a minute, and then you can fold in the butter gently, set it aside, and we're going to start to whip our egg whites. Now, my camera died while I was doing this, so I'm sorry that I don't have a great visual for you, but whip until your egg whites are nice and stiff, and then gently fold them in. I like to do just a third of the egg whites first, kind of loosen up the batter, and then you can fold in the rest. When you pour your batter into your pan, make sure to smooth it not only into all 4 corners of the pan, but make sure you smooth it down so it is nice and even, because this batter will not settle while it bakes. So if you have any uneven areas, guess what? You're going to have uneven sponge, and it's going to be much more difficult to create a level cake. You can see in my sponge where there are some thinner bits. It's still going to taste great, but it just helps with appearance. To cool the joconde, I like to leave it in the pan for about 15 minutes until you can touch the pan pretty much. Now, this is where you're going to be a little inventive, I guess. I don't know. I like to take another piece of parchment paper and put that on top of the joconde. That way it won't get stuck to my cooling rack because I don't want to deal with that. Place your cooling racks on top of your pan and very carefully, especially if you have to use two cooling racks because you don't have one giant one, very carefully flip that over. Take the pan off and gently peel off the bottom piece of parchment paper. Set that aside because we will use it again. Let your sponge cool down until it is room temperature, no more than an hour. Once your joconde is cooled, we're going to put it back into the baking pan so that it's easy to store. So get that piece of parchment paper that we set aside, put it back onto your sponge, put your pan over the sponge, and we're going to pretty much reverse it, flip it very carefully so that the sponge is back in the pan. Take off that parchment paper that is now on top, and you're going to sprinkle a thin layer of sugar over top of your sponge. This is going to help keep it nice and moist. I like to use a pastry brush to make sure that that sugar is evenly distributed. Once you do that, put your parchment paper back on top of the sponge, wrap up your pan, and then you can put it in the fridge for at least an hour, or in this case, overnight. It's day 3. That means it is the big day. We are putting together our mini opera cake. So we're going to start by cutting the joconde sponge into 4 equal parts. I like to do kind of like a T-cut on it so that they're more like a fat rectangle, but you could also do this as 4 long rectangles if you want a longer cake. Totally up to you. Once you have your joconde sponge all cut up, take one of those sections, flip it over. I like to put it on a piece of wax paper on a cutting board just to make it easy, and put a thin layer of ganache on the bottom of your sponge, and then put it in the fridge and chill it for 15 to 20 minutes. When it's done chilling, it'll be nice and firm, and that is going to be the bottom of your cake, and it's going to make it easy to move it from the cutting board where we're assembling it onto your cake board at the very end. Now, to assemble our mini opera cake, you're going to take that bottom piece of sponge that has the ganache, flip that over so the ganache is on the bottom. Okay, that is the bottom of your cake. Now we're going to brush it with some coffee syrup. Go heavy on this, guys. I didn't go as heavy as I should have this time. You want to really saturate it. If you're neurotic, you could measure out about an ounce of coffee syrup for each layer. Totally up to you. Go crazy with it. I also suggest after you brush the sponge with the coffee syrup, let it sit for about 5 minutes. Let that syrup soak into it. Totally optional. It's up to you. Now you're going to put on a thin, even layer of coffee buttercream. You only have enough coffee buttercream for this recipe. There's really not much left over. So you want it to be a nice layer, but not too thick. Make sure it's that it's smooth and level. Put on your next layer. Soak that with coffee syrup, but this time we're going to spread on a layer of chocolate ganache. Your chocolate has set up a little too much, it's just a little too stiff, you can always pop it in the microwave for about 5 seconds, loosen it up a bit, and it should smooth out just fine. Add your third layer of joconde sponge. Brush it, saturate it with that coffee syrup. Remember, you can let it soak in. And add another layer of coffee buttercream. Smooth it up, nice and level, nice and smooth. And add your top layer, final piece of joconde sponge. Again, saturate that layer, but this time we are doing just a very thin layer of coffee buttercream. It's just to create a smooth surface and even surface for our chocolate glaze, which will be coming a little bit later. You want to very, very gently heat your chocolate until it is melted, and you do not want it to go over 90 degrees Fahrenheit. Stir it very well between bursts in the microwave. If you had some larger chunks in your chocolate that just will not melt, but you really don't want to overheat your chocolate, you can always just pour your chocolate through a strainer and get those chunks out. That's just if you're being extra. If you really don't care, just melt it all together. It's going to be great anyways. Your glaze is ready. Your mini opera cake is cold. Let's throw it together. Take that cake out of the fridge and pour your wonderful chocolate glaze over it. You want to try to keep most of that on the cake, but a little bit going over the edge is not a big deal. Pour it all over the cake. Use an offset spatula if you need to gently move it into the corners. You'll see that the chocolate will start to set fairly quickly since your cake was so cold. Now pop it into the fridge and let it chill for about 30 minutes, and then we'll trim. Okay, it's cold. It's chilled. We are good to go. I like to heat my knife up under hot running water and then dry it off, and then kind of rock it over the chocolate to kind of score it before you push down. If you just kind of whack into it, you could crack the chocolate and ruin your finish. So just be careful with that. You want to trim off just enough of the cake to have smooth, clean, beautiful lines. So it might be a little different for you than it is for me, but just trim it down until it looks beautiful. Once it is trimmed, you can gently slide a large offset spatula or just a regular spatula even if you want underneath the cake and lift it up off of your wax paper and transfer it onto your cake board. If you want to know how I made this cake board, you can check out my tutorial. I'll put a link above and below. I actually, because this is kind of a weird cake, weird shape, I just cut out the size that I needed from a white foam core poster board, and then I used my tutorial to cover it so that it looked pretty. Now it's more or less good to go. You can start slicing it if you want, or you can put it back in the fridge if you think it needs to chill a little bit longer.
All right, that's it. You finished it. You worked hard. Took you a couple of days, I know, but when you have this first bite, you're going to totally understand when I say it's worth it. My absolute favorite cake. I would love to know what you think of this cake. Leave a comment below. Tell me if you think it's worth the effort, because I sure as heck do. And if you really enjoyed this video, please hit that like button and subscribe so you can see more videos on my channel. Thank you so much for baking with me today. I'll see you in the next one. Bye!